Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Scott Horton, a professor at Columbia Law School and a contributing editor at Harper's in Legal Affairs and National Security. He serves on the American branch of the International Law Association and has represented a variety of journalists and whistleblowers. Welcome to Background Briefing, Scott Horton.
Great to be with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Scott. And over the years, you've followed the Mueller investigation and Russiagate very closely. But there's been something of a break in the story today. The influential crony of Putin, so-called Putin chef, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who also runs the mercenary group, the Wagner Group, that is fighting in Ukraine. And he's actually challenging now the Russian military in a way for power. And maybe he's also positioning himself to be a successor to Putin, at least to enter politics. But Prigozhin was responding to a request to comment on a Bloomberg report saying that Russia was interfering in the current elections. And Prigozhin said, "Gentlemen, we interfered, we are interfering, and we will interfere. Carefully, precisely, surgically, and the way we do it, the way we can." So that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Finally, the Russian side, this close crony of Putin's, admitting that, yeah, we did interfere, we are interfering, and we will continue to interfere. And this is happening a day before this election. So how stupid are we in this country? Why did all of that work that Mueller did go nowhere? Why didn't anybody read the report? Why are we so brain dead to the obvious? And here, the same man who is clearly a traitor, Donald Trump, is about to announce that he's running for president again.
Well, all really good questions, Ian. I mean, I think, of course, it comes as a surprise to no one that Prigozhin ran operations to interfere with the U.S. election. That's been reported now for about 8 years, and in considerable detail, with breakthroughs from Dutch intelligence, in fact, where they monitored people going into his offices, and we had reports by the intelligence community rather, in 2016. Also in 2020, we have a report that was just released by the DNI that got almost no attention by the American media, which made the conclusion that there was a large-scale Russian effort to influence the presidential elections in 2020, and that this was still ongoing. So, of course, it's amazing that Prigozhin openly says this, but that's also part of the game that the Kremlin has been playing. In fact, you'll see a number of senior figures around Putin jokingly claiming credit for interference operations, claiming credit for having elected Trump in 2016. And if you follow Russian media regularly, and I do, particularly the 60 Minutes program of Vladimir Solovyov, you know that almost every day there is discussion of the American midterm elections, and there are claims that this is the path to victory in Ukraine for Russia. The path for victory goes through the American election system. That the Kremlin's friends, who are Republicans, Donald Trump and certain Republicans, will win the midterm elections. Once they have won the midterm elections, they will put a complete kibosh on American assistance, particularly military assistance to Ukraine. And after that, it'll be a cakewalk for Russia to win in Ukraine. So all that's out there, it's perfectly clear, and it's getting relatively little attention in the United States.
And of course, the other story that really, I think, opens up the real motive behind Russia's interference and Putin's interference comes from Jim Rutenberg in the New York Times Magazine over this weekend. I'll just quote from the article. 6 years before Putin's invasion, Kremlin proxies tried to broker a deal with Trump campaign officials to partition Ukraine. Though Russiagate has long been seen as a matter of U.S. politics, it may be more accurately understood as the road to war. And Rutenberg really does lay out the whole map of what was really behind the Russian interference, was particularly using Manafort and this GRU, Russian military intelligence agent, Kilimnik, to basically broker this, what they call the Mariupol plan, which is essentially what Putin just did the other day, where he annexed the same territories that back in 2016 they were going to negotiate with the Americans, with the Trump administration, to basically let him take this. And of course, back in 2016, Ukraine was incredibly weak and internationally isolated, shall we say. So what do you make of this amazing article that really lays out the true story, the main story, which is it's always been about Ukraine. It was never, I mean, they dirtied up Hillary Clinton, they stole her emails, they hurt her, but the real point was to get Trump in power so that he'd go along with Putin's plan to annex the east of Ukraine, the very thing that Putin just recently announced.
Well, I think this is a very skillfully done article, and it really, I've gone over it a couple of times. I don't see anything in it that is news that we didn't know before, but nevertheless, taking all the various pieces we knew before and putting them together in an intelligent, coherent way, we do see how the Putin plan to invade and gain control of Ukraine, or at least large parts of it, was in the backdrop of the entire story that we call Russiagate from the beginning. And Manafort is right in the middle of it. The Manafort-Kilimnik relationship, as you note, is central to everything. Kilimnik, of course, is a Russian military intelligence officer, GRU. He clearly was playing a central role in everything. And I think when we go back and we look at things that happen, there are these very key giveaways that occurred that people paid almost no attention to at the time. And the first of those was, I think, at the Republican National Convention, where overnight, through sleight of hand that no one has ever really been able to explain, the Republican platform suddenly changed with respect to Ukraine, to move from being supportive of Ukraine to taking a very hands-off posture, which was exactly what Putin wanted of the United States and of American leaders. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was, on the eve of Trump's inauguration, this peace plan is put forward. And this peace plan, I mean, where did this come from? I mean, it came from Russian agents. And the substance of the peace plan was exactly what Putin wanted to achieve in his whole scheme involving Ukraine. So, that really showed the power that Russian intelligence was exercising over the Trump campaign, and it shows that they had a clear objective in mind, which was Ukraine. It was advancing the Russian position in Ukraine with very specific territorial gains and distancing Ukraine from its allies, the United States and the other members of NATO.
And it all started in the Grand Havana room at the top of 665th Avenue, the building owned by Jared Kushner and his family. And there's a whole story about that building as well. And then basically, at the end of the day, Putin did not get out of Trump or out of his presidency what he'd paid for. And this is why he's decided to go to war, right? Later on, of course, we had the deep state strike back, if you will, with a number of top officials in the Trump National Security Council going public at hearings, which led to Trump's impeachment, about Trump's efforts, and through Rudy Giuliani, and again, the same Ukraine playbook, which was designed to put the squeeze on Zelensky to get dirt on Biden, because, again, this operation was being run by the Russians, by Kilimnik, as a matter of fact, the same guy, right. Get the dirt on Biden to stop Biden, because the Kremlin knew that Biden would be less sympathetic to their aims and their plans over Ukraine than Trump would. So, again, I repeat that Trump, in about a week or so, is going to be announcing he's running for president. So, Scott, tell me that this story makes a difference. I mean, most of it the information comes out of the Mueller report. But who's read the Mueller report? I mean, you got to admit that Bill Barr did a hell of a good job of marginalizing that report.
And Trump did. Remember, Trump and his cronies have talked about Russiagate, the hoax, etc. When in fact, no material evidence was ever presented that there was a hoax here. Even John Durham, who was tasked with shoring this whole counter narrative up, he brought two prosecutions. Both prosecutions failed spectacularly, and they failed with juries concluding that they believed the defendants and they didn't believe John Durham. In other words, they were more inclined to believe Russiagate than this counter narrative. So I think if you look at Rutenberg and what he's written in his article, it's nothing really new. He's put it together very powerfully, I think. But it's all facts that we've known for some time. It's all facts that Trump has tried desperately to refute with no success whatsoever in doing so. In fact, the evidence in support of them is incrementally growing all the time. And the core of the problem here, the reason Putin reaches ultimately to an invasion to accomplish his ends, that has to do principally with Putin's success, actually, in other fields. He was trying to achieve what he wanted through domestic political manipulation in Ukraine, and he was successful in doing that frequently. But then when he seized Crimea and a large part of the Donbass, that changed the electoral balance within Crimea. So a country within Ukraine. So a country that was once on the tip of a knife between pro and anti-Russian interests flipped and really became clearly anti-Russian. And Zelensky is the token of that. So Putin had to adopt an entirely different tactic, which was a military invasion. And that's still ongoing. And I think the side tactic, in addition to the military invasion, was to stop Western support for Ukraine. And he's done that with allies throughout the NATO countries, but in the United States, particularly with allies in the Republican Party. And I think we see the shift going on. So the Republican Party, which was criticizing Biden for not doing enough for Ukraine, now suddenly is flipping and is criticizing Biden for wasting too much money in Ukraine. And I think we see with Kevin McCarthy's platform and statements by key Republican senators and congressmen that it is likely that if the Republicans take control of Congress following the midterm elections, they will use their position to block support for the Ukrainian military. Or at least ratchet it down. And that would be a huge win for Vladimir Putin.
Well, even when Zelensky came to power, he wanted to make a peace deal, even though they understood that the Minsk Accords were devastating and would cripple Ukraine's ability to have autonomy, because basically, the whole point of the Minsk agreement was to give Putin veto power over Ukraine, and that's what he's always wanted. He always wanted to be able to control it on the cheap. But on the American side, of course, going back to the Mueller report, they were about to give Manafort a deal, and when Andrew Weissman, who was the number two on that on the Mueller report, scuttled the deal because he just found out about, once he got the information about the meeting between Manafort and Kilimnik and all the exchange of emails, Weissman suddenly realized that that was what the real story was about, that the Mariupol plan, this partitioning of eastern Ukraine, was the quid pro quo that Putin wanted. In other words, that's why they were helping the Trump campaign. But again, having had that realization on the part of Weissman, who's on MSNBC all the time, How is it that they can't somehow get the American public and the press to pay attention to the Mueller report, which apparently nobody's ever read?
Yeah, that's a fundamental problem, I think. And in fact, I think a failure to reach deep and understand the entire game that's going on. It seems to me there are only a handful of political figures in Washington who are doing that today. And I think it's a problem for us. And I think in this election right now, we really don't. I mean, we have J.D. Vance in Ohio saying he really doesn't give a damn about what happens to Ukraine and the Ukrainians, and it's a waste of money. And, this statement hardly captures the imagination of anyone and doesn't figure as a serious issue in that campaign. And I think we've seen similar things in district after district around the country. So I think there are very, very few people who are putting together all the dots. And if they do, they'll immediately be denounced as partisan Democrats and followers of Hillary Clinton. So the counter narrative that Trump and his team have put together is really unimpressive and unpersuasive. But nevertheless, it's enough for Trump followers.
Well, it is shocking, and I, for the life of me, don't understand McCarthy and the Republicans. What is there about Putin? Why do they want to help this guy? It's so obvious that he's literally trying to murder a country before our eyes, attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure. The brutality of this man is unbelievable, and the idea that you want to reward him, which will then make a permanent destabilization of Europe, because if he gets away with murder, literally, he's going to cause more trouble. I mean, I just, for the life of me, don't understand at this moment, why would they do this?
Kevin McCarthy, remember, in 2016, he said at a Republican caucus meeting that he believed Trump was taking money from the Russians.
Right. I swear to God, he said, I swear to God that Trump and Congressman Rohrabacher are on Putin's payroll.
Yes. And so I think that reflects what he honestly believed at the time. And there was quite a bit of evidence for that, and still is. There's quite a bit of evidence. And nevertheless, that doesn't seem to matter to him. So you're looking at a party whose leadership are totally nihilistic at this point, who really don't seem to embrace many values of any kind, and who seem prepared to throw out what is basically 50 years of bipartisan foreign policy, just throw it out the window and reject it, and embrace the influence of someone who transparently does not have the best interests of America at heart. If you go through and read Putin's speeches,
putting it mildly,
in the United States, it's horrifying. He thinks that Americans are mongrels and a sort of inferior species of human being who need to be repressed, right? So why would you align yourself with someone who says such things and then acts in a way to reflect that he believes it? I don't know. So it's enough to suspect corrupt influence in the background.
I assume that that's all about money at the end of the day, and that's, of course, what Trump's all about, and it's Russian money we're talking about. I thank you for joining us, Scott Horton.
Great pleasure to be with you.
And again, I've been speaking with Scott Horton, who's a professor at Columbia Law School and a contributing editor at Harper's in Legal Affairs and National Security. He serves on the American branch of the International Law Association and has represented a variety of journalists and whistleblowers. This has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producer Graham Fitzgibbon. And to help us sustain this program into the future and assure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate or publictruthmedia.org, where you will find our non-profit Public Truth Media Foundation, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And if you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we'll include extended interviews searchable by topic, and have made it easy for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we also encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305 took the kids to the park and disappeared by 9:30. Who'll ever know how much she loved them so? That dark night alone in America. Quiet voice singing something to me, an angel song about the home of the brave in this land here of the free. One time, one night in America. One more light goes out in America. A young girl tosses a coin in the wishing well. She hopes for a heaven while for her there's just this hell. She gave away her life to become somebody's wife. Another wish unanswered in America. People having so much